Hey, it's Chase from On the Table Gaming, and today Mike Meeple is joining me as we explore Caged In, a fast two-player fighting game that has an MMA theme that we are both really excited to talk about. And we are joined by the two designers from Foamhammer Games, Paul LaPorte and Dan Shurkre. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So, Paul, if you could, what's the elevator pitch for Caged In? If we're talking about this board game, it's a two-player board game, what does our audience need to know right off the get-go?
So, game's real simple. You're a fighter, your opponent's a fighter, and you're trying to beat each other in a mixed martial arts match. You're either trying to knock each other out, submit each other, you can get a decision, you can try and finish on the feet, finish on the ground. The game plays in about, depending on the time, 15 to 20 minutes for each session. It features custom models. It features a board where you can track damage to parts of your body as well as your overall fatigue. So Dan and I both really worked on trying as hard as we could to bring a real fight to a tabletop space.
Yeah, we really wanted a game of Caged In to feel like an MMA match. We wanted to get as much MMA into the game and still have it be a fun board game to play as we could.
All right, great. So Chase and I both kind of have some combat backgrounds. You know, I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Chase, I know, did some cage fights there for a while. So what was kind of your guys' big inspiration to go with this theme? You know, mixed martial arts. I don't think we've really seen a game that's done this before.
Well, in my early 20s, I was all in on MMA. I watched UFC. I bought all the fights. The Ultimate Fighter, that reality show, really got me in. Like the first season, I was glued to the TV. I didn't get punched in the face like you guys did, but I watched people punch other people in the face, and I
that's why you're designing games now, and we're not.
Yeah, all right.
So yeah. There's a lot that goes into MMA, and I think that's what makes it so compelling. Is there's stand-up fighting, there's ground fighting, there's grappling. That can make it really a nightmare to gamify, right? And we've tried to live vicariously through like video games. So you have like the UFC fighting games, and you're trying to do like submissions, like rolling the joysticks, etc. And it's just hard to capture like the frantic energy of that. So can you walk us through a little bit of the gameplay for this game? And how do you try to capture the feeling of an MMA fight in a board game form?
Want me to take that one, Dan?
Sure, Paul.
Okay. So when we were walking through the game trying to figure out how it wanted to go, you're right, MMA is a very kind of fast-paced and frenetic sport. And our previous game that I had designed, which is about actually running a professional wrestling company, I just do weird stuff. And that's why I think when I saw Dan had presented the idea for a mixed martial arts game, again, it was initially his idea, it was his design. And then I saw it and I'm like, this seems pretty interesting. I think we can go with it. And then playing it, the original prototype that he sent to me, the thing that drew me into it and got me interested in it wasn't obviously, mixed martial arts, like you said, it's bang, very fast paced, like it's over. But for me, the thing that interested me about this was it's almost like, so if you're fighting in a mixed martial arts fight, and I never did mixed martial arts, but I used to cover it for like radio. I had a podcast, I did a radio show for local radio, I covered local fights. So I talked to a lot of fighters. And in having those discussions with people, when you're in the middle of the fight, it's like everything slows down for you and your brain is having to make all of these decisions split second, like where do I block? Where do I hit? Do I defend? Do I attack? What do I do? And when I was going through and playing this game, I felt myself going through those same decisions. It's like, do I use this? Do I throw this punch? Do I play this card? Or do I hold it because it protects the left side of my body and I need to protect the left side of my body? And so for me, it wasn't necessary. It was more the mental aspect of mixed martial arts than the physical aspect that I felt like it was recreating. It was recreating that element of, I am scared all the time and I don't know what to do. It was just kind of the feeling I had when I was playing the game. And I kind of like that feeling that you evoke that, because I imagine if you're actually fighting somebody, that's kind of how you feel, no matter how, and you guys could probably test this. Like, the guy's across from you and you kind of know what he's going to do, but you also know that at any second he can, like, like put you in the hospital or just like completely end your night, and you don't really know what to do with that. So that was really going back and forth, was just trying to kind of convert those mechanics of what that feels like more than the actual action in the real world to the board gaming space. So it really was trying to, we tried to, obviously you can't have it be like end in an instant, sort of like that doesn't work for a board game as much. We do have an element of that with submissions, but submissions are very costly if you try and do them too early on because you have to expend a lot of energy. So it was really kind of trying to get that balance of, how to make this dynamic and quick, but also really make it like a physical chess match converted to kind of an actual chessboard. That was really what it was. And a lot of it was just kind of tinkering until stuff fell right. Like, it wasn't really like a formula that we came up with. It was just like, we just kind of throw some rules down. We'd each play like 5, 10, 20 games. How did this feel? Does this work? Does this not work? Do we need to do something else? Rinse, repeat until we hit a point where it's like, nope, this is good. Let's go with it. And then that's what we've got right now.
Yeah, the original game was real interesting. I sent him the prototype, and he called. We had a long phone call, and he really liked the game. The prototype had all those elements. My original design had all those elements that Paul was just talking about, with stand up and ground game and the fatigue and the tiring your fighters out. It just wasn't. It wasn't as refined as it is now. It's more of a complete game now, and it was really actually pretty cool that it was a real smooth process. I mean, Paul lives in New York and I'm in Michigan, and we've never met face to face. And yet this whole design process, we worked together. It was pretty smooth. I mean, honestly, there wasn't any hiccups to get from where we started to where we are now. And that's, to me, that's pretty incredible in and of itself. But the game itself has 3 real important elements, being the stand up, the ground game, and the fatigue, and how it all works together. And like Paul was saying, a game will last about 20 minutes because you don't want to play a game that lasts 30 seconds, right? And sometimes MMA matches can go that way. And the way that the mechanics ended up when we were done made it so that it wasn't such a... It didn't go that way. You still felt satiated after a game, right? You felt like you had an experience rather than you got gypped out of a win, kind of.
Yeah, and actually, I was really surprised by the depth that there is in the game. We played through it. We did one game quick, just to kind of figure out the rules. We played another game. We may have still been getting some mistakes down, but like it was pretty quick to pick up. But then we started realizing that the ringmanship and like being able to move around the cage and taking position actually matters too. And there's like this whole level of depth. And then, one of us got pinned up against the cage, and we were like, oh man, this is actually, this wrestling guy's like, beating me up. Like, this is actually pretty amazing. So, for people listening who haven't even seen this at all, so stand up, you start off standing, you're going to draw 5 cards. You start with 5, and then typically it's 4, right? You start with the extra in the corner. And so say you go out there, you start trading blows with your opponent. How do you work offense, defense? Like give people kind of a taste of what that might look like as far as card play.
So as far as how the game plays out, it's kind of like a sort of match card take that sort of deal, where you'll play a card. The card will typically target a location of the person's body, either the head, either side of the head. Although the head has 1 damage meter, because it doesn't really matter if you get hit on the left side of the head or the right side of the head. You're still getting your brain rattled around. But for the purposes of defending, you're targeting the left side of the head, the right side of the head, the right side of the body, or the left or right leg. And then you can choose to, if you have a card with the same location, you can discard that card to defend. So, if I throw a hook to your left body, you can play any card that you have that targets your left body to block it. It's basically you're giving up your attack for defense, essentially. So that's kind of like the bare bones of the game, but the cards also do other stuff other than damage. So you have to discard cards to move around the cage. You have to discard cards to position your opponent, to push them in certain directions. You're limited on the amount of times you can draw cards to either when your hand is completely empty, or you have to basically take your action to draw extra cards. So there is that element of hand management of like, okay, well, do I want to just keep playing one shot, and now I've only got 1 card in my hand, and now my opponent maybe has 3 or 4, and now I have nothing to defend with? or do I try and burn everything out, refill my hand? You know, there's certain fighters that will allow you to just kind of empty your hand completely and redraw, but at the cost of fatiguing yourself more or having other drawbacks that are involved with that. So that's what the stand-up looks like. If you play a takedown card, then that will bring things down to the ground. Ground game plays pretty similarly, where you can either choose to play a card to do damage to a location of your opponent, or you can choose to play cards to tire them out. So you can actually play their fatigue, and that matters because the fatigue has certain levels to it. So the higher you get, the worse kind of condition you're in. And at a certain point, you become susceptible to being submitted. And that is you play it, you have some chance to defend yourself you're basically at the mercy of the deck. You overturn so many cards. If you overturn so many tap cards, you lose. If you overturn an escape, you can get out. The fight continues on. So it's pretty similar. You know, the ground gameplay is pretty similar to that, except it's a little bit more of, it's condensed a little bit more down into a few different decisions, and then ultimately the decision of, do I want to stay here or do I want to try and bring things back up to the feet? Where am I at the best advantage? And then around all of that, there are 4 different types of fighters that you can play as. There's the striker, who is extremely good on the feet. They're basically a machine gun, I always like to call them, because they can just they can chain together long strings of strikes, and you have a very difficult time dealing with that. They're also very versatile at blocking takedowns. You have a wrestler who does both damage and fatigue to people when they're on the ground, so they're extremely powerful on the ground. And they have certain advantages if you can get your opponent against the cage on the ground. There's a submission fighter, which they can't do any damage on the ground at all, but they do double the amount of fatigue that everybody else does. Yeah. So you tire people out extremely quickly. And then that allows you to sink in submissions, and they can basically play 2 different submissions on you at once. So you have to block both of them instead of just one. And then finally, there's the judo fighter, and their biggest deal is, number 1, their takedowns actually deal damage to you. And basically, they always go first when the fight changes from one area to another. So they basically always go first when the fight goes from standing to the ground or from the ground to standing. So the judo fighter really wants the fight to go down, get back up, go down, get back up, because they kind of just have that advantage and they can deal damage every single time they're throwing you around. So all of those elements together, and again, it's a lot of stuff to throw around, but Dan and I worked pretty hard on making sure it was kind of easy to pick up, easy to get your head around. We have lots of tutorial videos out there. The manual itself is pretty in-depth and not huge. So, we really tried to cram as much as we could into as few rules as possible.
Yeah, I don't. The rules aren't intimidating, I don't think, by any stretch. It's pretty easy game to get your head around, I think.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think you go? What would be your preference here for a fighter archetype?
Out of those, gosh, knowing me, probably submission fighter / striker. I was when I did fight all of ancient times ago, I was really good on top.
Yeah.
I could wrap tuck in a head and arm triangle, pretty easily. But I'm curious, because MMA is such a complicated sport. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, all of that stuff. Did you find yourself having to make any concessions in the sport in order to make it fit in the confines of a board game?
I was going
to say, as far as a lot of the elements of MMA are represented, but I would say that probably maybe grappling. I mean, you can't really grapple. At least in our game, you can't. I mean, there's no mechanics for that, so you're not really. But you can shove in the game to move your players, your pawns around the cage there to kind of position, get them where you need them to be to take them down against the cage, that sort of thing. But grappling itself really isn't a big part of it.
Yeah, we had some discussions, and we still do, in regards to potentially working that in as an expansion at some point.
Maybe like a clinch,
yes.
Clinch.
So clinching and ground positioning for me are like the two ones that I would really like to see in there at some point. And I think that that's something that we may work in at some point, like later on. But it was definitely a point of like, if we get too much into this, it's going to be a lot for somebody to absorb. So we'd rather kind of do it as an optional thing in an expansion later on. And then the other one, which I kind of mentioned, was just the one punch KO nature of mixed martial arts. You really don't have a mechanic to do that. I've had plenty of fights end in the first round, but they're not going to end in the first 2 or 3 turns. That is one that probably will never, like, it's just kind of counterproductive to a mixed martial arts game.
We'll sit down to play a game and be like, all right, done.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
expansion, one-hit KOs. There I win.
One of the things that we are already discussing, because we've already talked about what the expansions, if should everything go well with this, what they're going to look like. And one of the things we have discussed is because one of the things that we got a lot of feedback from is wanting to see more types of fighters. Like, oh, you got like wrestlers, like, can we get like a Muay Thai fighter? Can we get like a boxer? And I think that what we're gonna do instead of that is that for the first expansion, we're basically just gonna put out a deck of traits, and then say, okay, here's the Iron Jaw, so you have like extra hit points to your face. Or I think that one is like if you suffer a head knockout, you don't suffer it and you remove 3 cubes, and then that's like
Chuck
your
Liddell special.
or like the liver shot, where if you throw like a hook to the left side of the body, it deals extra damage. Stuff like that. So I think instead of doing different archetypes, it's just going to be, each of these are going to be like this is going to be like a 3-point trait, a 2-point trait, a 1-point trait. You have 10 points to make your fighter go ahead, and then that will allow you to customize your fighter, emulate fighters in the real world, rather than trying to come up with 10, 15 different sort of subtypes of fighter. I think that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things that's been discussed. Also, another thing that Dan has brought up, and I recently told this to some people and they went wild for it, Dan, is the idea of having kind of a longer career with a fighter.
Career
so almost
mode?
like if you guys ever play like Blood Bowl or anything like that, where like your guys, like if like somebody gets knocked out, maybe they have to roll in an injury table, and now that affects a trait of theirs, or they get additional traits as they get on, and then like you actually track like a career of a fighter.
Nice.
Rather than just having it be, everything takes place in a vacuum. And then, and once they get to a certain point, you may want to retire them, or you could do leagues with certain people, things like that. So those are really the ideas that we have right now that didn't kind of make the initial cut of the base, because my design philosophy, and I did it with my previous game, and Dan and I kind of really saw pretty eye to eye on it for this one, is don't include any more rules than it needs to feel full, and then stop. And that's where we're at with this, and we got a lot of it. Those are the couple things I mentioned are probably the only things that we really kind of left out. But we are, we're gonna look to add some expansions, make things a little more complex for the people who want to kind of go down the rabbit hole, but don't make it required for everybody. Another thing that we got a big request for, and Dan was really surprised by this, is that a lot of people asked for a solo mode. Where they wanted to either like play like against the bot, or just figure out a way to play like for score or whatever. And I think that's because my game Book It had a solo mode to it. So I think a lot of people who were interested in that were like, oh, hey, cool. I don't have anybody to play with this with. I still want to play it. How can I do that? So probably before the campaign starts, me and Dan are probably going to have to put our heads together and try and get some stuff down for at least some prototype solo rules, because that is a very, very popular request so far from the people who...
And that's really flattering, really. I mean, people don't have other people to play games with, but they still want your game. It makes you feel good. That's pretty cool, and we'd like to accommodate those types of people. So
and talk about like you were just talking about like, hey, we'd love to add these things on future expansions. I think that's actually what made me kind of sold on this game, was when I played it. I was thinking like, oh my gosh, it'd be so cool. There's so much design space. Like they could do this. But it wasn't because I was like, oh, you need to fix this thing. It was because I was like, this base thing works so well that you can build off of it. And I was like, okay, so this has legs. Like, I think for me, it was a moment where I had a wrestler person pushed me into the corner, and there's like a +1 damage spot, and then took me down and started pounding at me. And I was like, oh, like, so one thing we didn't talk about, there are, combos and haymakers and other sorts of abilities that are linked on the cards, but there's also the ring itself. And initially I was sort of taken aback that like, oh, you're making the floor of the ring, different zones do different things. Like, why is that? And then after playing it, it really kind of sold me on it. So can you just talk briefly about what does the board look like, and just roughly what are kind of the positions that you might move on to that give you bonuses that make ringsmanship actually matter in this game?
Sure, the cage itself is a grid of hexes essentially, And the reason why they have there's spaces that do different things inside of the cage is to encourage movement inside of the cage, essentially. So without that, there's really no encouragement for pawn to move your pawns outside of a line, right? We wanted it to be a three-dimensional game where the cage actually mattered rather than just a 2D back and forth straight line, right? So the way to do that and the way to make like the shove mechanic important is to be able to move your opponent into a space that has, for instance, the +1 damage space. So if you get them down on the ground and you do your ground and pound damage, they're gonna take more damage. And then there's counter strike. That's another mechanic you didn't mention when you mentioned the combos and haymakers. There's also counter strikes, and there's certain spaces inside the cage that if you're standing on a counter strike space and somebody throws a shot at you, if you block it, even if it's not a counter strike card, you can counter their strike and deal the damage to them rather than you taking the damage yourself. And that always makes you feel good when somebody's throwing a punch at you and you end up punching them instead.
Yeah, and it is funny because that was actually a fairly late addition to the game, because me and Dan had that problem throughout the whole design process. It's like, it's just two people charging at each other. Nobody ever moves side to side. Like, how are we going to fix this problem? And I actually brought it over to a friend of mine for basically every New Year's Eve. I go over to my friend's house and we just play board games all through the evening. Yeah. So I tend to take my stuff there to kind of test it, to see how it goes. And as I was taking it there, it was like the morning I was getting ready to leave, I was mentioning it to my friends. I was talking to my friend's wife about it because she had just played, and she was like, Scrabble. I was like, Scrabble. She's like, yeah, like, you know how like the different score spots in the Scrabble board? You should have something like that on the actual board so people want to move into those spaces. I'm like holy crap. That's amazing. So, you know, we, in determining those, like the center of the cage is blank because the center of the cage is the most powerful spot. You can kind of push people however you want. You are the furthest away from the fence out of anybody. So, you know, if you're a striker, you really want to be there. If you're a wrestler, you want to be there so you can push people away from that. But then the spaces around them, those are the counter spaces. And the justification for that was that, you know, you have a lot of room in those spaces. You kind of have the most space to move around, so you would have the most mobility to potentially counter each other. And you will see a lot of fights where both fighters will just move into both counter spaces and just beat the crap out of each other. And those are always really fun to watch, you know, when a couple people just like move into the two spaces which are right in front of each other. Now just everything they do counters each other, and they're just doing damage all the time, and that's how a lot of people like to play. And then the +1 damage spaces were put in, and going way back to the old days of the UFC, you know, like Dan had mentioned, early 2000s, even before that, when wrestling was really dominant, a very, very popular tactic was, I'm going to put you in the corner of the cage so you have nowhere to move your head, and I'm going to beat you to death. And that was like the strategy of like Militich fighters and Quest guys and like half the roster.
The old Chael Sonnen days.
Yeah,
that's funny. The Matt Hughes days.
Matt Hughes, or Tank Abbott.
That's the Matt
go
Hughes.
All the way back.
That's the Matt Hughes, the Matt Lindland, the Dan Severn tactic is the Mark Kerr tactic. If we're really going back,
God,
I will pick you up.
Machine.
I will. Yeah, well, he was just headbutting people a bunch. You know, like, so that was really back in the day. But yeah, so that was the idea of like, we want to make this we wanted a good space and a bad space. It's like, here's the space you want to be in, here's the space you really don't want to be in. And then additionally, the kind of the hidden spaces are the corners, which is that if you're in your corner and you start your turn in your corner, you get to draw an extra card. And that's basically representative of like, your corner is behind you talking in your ear, telling you what to do. You have more options now. So another thing you can do is to, you know, bring somebody into, you know, your corner, get them down, and now you have extra card advantage over them. So that's kind of like the hidden third secret space that we always like to kind of use.
So as we start to maybe pivot here, so, you know, you have a pretty cool game here. It's going to be launching on GameFound on the 29th.
Yes.
You know, for people out there who are maybe like aspiring game designers, what advice would you give for people who are maybe interested in creating their own board games?
Just go for it. Believe in yourself. Somebody will like your game. I mean, I designed this game originally 152 years ago, right? and it was just for me and my friends to play, right?
In COVID years.
But I
Yeah,
loved
yeah.
it. I absolutely loved it, and I thought there was potential there. So if you like your game, just go for it. Reach out to people. Somebody will bite. You'll find your Paul LaPorte.
And similarly, when I first did my game, I took it on a camping trip with a bunch of friends of mine. Like I said, my first game was a pro wrestling game. I've been involved in independent professional wrestling, kind of in the backstage stuff since like 2005. I have a lot of friends who are wrestlers. So we went on a camping trip, and I had just I was like, they always brought board games. Like, I want to make a game that they'll play and they'll think is fun and funny. And then I made it in like 3 days. I brought it out there, and they're like, you should actually do something with this. This is really good. So I would say for anybody who's looking into designing a game, it's number one, it's got to be whatever it is, whether it's the mechanic or the theme, you have to love it. Like, you have to be passionate about it. I picked for wrestling because I've been a lifelong wrestling fan. I've been involved in the scene. Dan picked MMA because he's a massive mixed martial arts fan. It has to be something you're interested in. It doesn't necessarily have to be the theme. If there's a certain type of mechanic that's more interesting to you, then go with that. But if it's not something that you want to look at for hundreds of hours and play 100 times or more, it's not going to work. Like, you
Right.
have to be the one who is willing to like run this thing into the ground and pick every little bit out of it. So, I mean, I would say that that's the first thing. And the second thing is, again, get the mechanics overall. Like, the design, even if you're not theme centric, the theme can come later. Like, just make it a working game. Make it have a beginning, a middle, an end. That have there be a winner. Have it be a satisfying playthrough the whole time. Make it so there's not a lot of boredom for any particular player. Make sure that if it's going to be a long thing, if it's going to be a longer game, that there are a lot of decisions, so people have to think about it even when they're not taking their turns, so they're not bored. So it's really just making sure that you have that complete experience, and then from there, you decide whether or not you want to try and get somebody else to publish it, or whether or not you want to do the legwork on your own. That is a whole other different conversation, but start off with everything, do that, get that out there, and then once you have it done, just get it in front of people. Like, I know there's so many people who are worried about, like,
That's a big thing.
Yeah, like, they're gonna, like, someone's gonna steal my game. Someone's gonna do this. Like, no, doesn't matter. When I didn't copyright my first game, I didn't do anything. It's like, here it is. If you want to steal it, fine, whatever. Like, that's like, okay, fine. Like, I'll live with it. I'll figure that out. But the amount you getting it in front of as many people, making versions of it for Tabletop Simulator, for Tabletopia, digital versions that people can play, that you can pass around, that they can play for free. That is going to build your initial fan base. That's going to build the people who are interested in your game. Then you can worry about selling it after that. It's really just getting it out there, getting it on paper, getting a game made, and then putting it in front of as many people as you can. Worry about making it a business afterwards.
Where you guys could be like, hey, fight community, those are the guys who took my game.
Yeah, I mean, I have enough evidence that I think I can prove it. Like,
wait a second.
We know people.
There we go.
So you guys talked about getting it out in front of a lot of people, getting it out in front of everybody. Let me ask you this. So for your guys' game, did you like pick and choose who you got it out in front of? I know obviously you say get it out in front of everybody, but but like were you thinking, this is going to be for the hardcore, this is going to be for the casual, or this is going to be for a kind of a gateway game, or this is going to, where do you see this game fitting into, in terms of its audience draw?
Well, kind of going back to what Paul said about designing your game. If the mechanics are fun, it's gonna be enjoyable regardless of what the theme is, right? There's a lot of great games out there that have excellent fun mechanics and the theme's just pasted on.
Yeah.
Our game's not quite like that. There's quite a bit of theme that shines through, but the mechanics of the game itself are fun enough that even people who don't like MMA or have no interest in MMA can have fun with the game. And that was really important to us from the very start, from the very beginning. And that's why we didn't want to overfill the game with a bunch of bloat that would bog everybody down, especially people who may not be into MMA, right?
Yeah. it's interesting because the first game I did is about professional wrestling. It's about running an independent professional wrestling company. Like, it is a niche subject within a niche subject within, like, it's like 3 layers down to the point where I'm like, I know who I'm selling this to, like, exactly. Like, I can name that person. So that was a little bit easier because I knew to go to, WrestleCon in New Orleans, WrestleMania weekend, and that's where we promoted it, because all of those wrestling nerds who were going to like stuff involved with professional wrestling are going to be there, and at least some of them are going to like board games, right? So, like, that's the place to go. This one, and it's still a niche subject, but I think it's more mainstream overall, and it's just fighting. Like, I think it's a more accessible one.
Yeah.
So, like, this is the one that I honestly had a little bit harder time marketing it to, because I think it fits a broader audience. I think it's like there's more people who are interested, and that kind of almost brings up more challenges, because it's like, now, before I was selling it to pro wrestling fans who are board game nerds. Now I'm trying to sell it to board game fans who are interested in mixed martial arts, and that's like a different demographic completely. So, in terms of the digital stuff, we're still obviously trying to throw it out in front of as many people as possible, but for the prototypes, we had 6, and I have one, Dan has one, and then we sent out 3 review copies, and we sent them out to a board gaming TikTok community. We sent one out to just a YouTuber that does previews, and then the third one we sent was to MMA on Point, a mixed martial arts channel in the UK, who, to their credit, they looked at it and were interested in it, but I wanted to hit like general board gamer, more in-depth board game, discussion, and then mixed martial arts. Maybe board games aren't necessarily your thing, but a lot of the people who aren't really board gamers that are into the theme, I put this in front of it and go, oh, hey, that's really cool. So it's really trying to get the eyes from those people onto that. So it's kind of trying to hit 3 different areas as opposed to the one I had a really, really good understanding of before.
Well, we're really looking forward to this game. And so we're looking at the 29th on GameFound. And where else can people find more about Caged In if they want to connect with you on social media, for example?
So all of the social media link stuff is at the GameFound site, and we have a shortcut URL for that. If you go to cagedingame.com, that'll take you to there. That'll give you the links for all of that. That gives you the links for our Discord server, which is about 300 members to it. Like, it's a really great community of not just board gamers, but just like there's a lot of just sports discussion and everything else that goes onto that. There are versions of it on Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator. If you search for Caged In on either of those, it should be pretty easy to find. So if you want to try the game out, no purchase necessary. Go ahead and go check that out over there. And then everything else, just search for Foamhammer Games, the name of the company. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Right now, leading up to from starting 2 weeks ago until through the end of the GameFound campaign at the end of April, we are doing a Twitch live stream every Thursday night from about 7 p.m. Eastern till about 10 p.m. Eastern, where we're doing demonstrations. We're having people play the game. We're talking about the game. We're just kind of hanging out, and we're going to be doing that right through. So if you want, and we're going to be putting up those videos archived on YouTube the day after. We've been doing that. So you can check out our YouTube page if you want to see demos of how the game is played, see people other than us playing it, like just like your average fans playing it. It's funny because last week we had like 2 people play 2 barn burner games that were just, one was a super close decision and one was like a late second round submission after they had both like beaten each other to like 1 cube of knockout each. It was insane, and it split 1-1, and we're going to do the trilogy fight this Thursday between the 2 of them. So we're kind of, having some fun hyping that up. So those are all the ways you can check it out. And we love to hear from people. So like, absolutely, like, leave us some comments on the GameFound page, get in the Discord server, chat it up with people. I love getting feedback and just discussing the game, answering any questions that people might have, all of that stuff. And also, so I said we had 6 prototypes. I only mentioned 5. The 6th one we are giving away for free. We are actually having a contest that you can find out more about on our GameFound page, where you can enter and get additional entries by following our different social media, sharing the campaign. We have secret codes that we're giving out on different platforms that you can get for additional entries. And then the day before the campaign launches on GameFound, so March 28th, We're going to announce the winner for that, and we're going to send them the 6th prototype copy, so you have a chance to win this for free before anybody else in the world has it outside of, a few reviewers and the designers themselves. So, we want to try and, get the community engaged with that stuff as well, build up as much buzz and as much interest as we can, and get somebody a free copy of the game.
I really hope I win.
You have to fight him for it. We got to have a... well, thanks so much for coming on. And in the meantime, whoever listening is able to get caged in on the table.